In recent years, humanitarian responses have been complicated by compounding crises, such as climate change, epidemics and pandemics, and complex conflicts. In an ever-changing humanitarian and development space, we ask, what does the security and safety of aid workers look like? And what might it look like in the future? I'm Tara Arthur from the Global Interagency Security Forum. In each episode, I'll be speaking to guests about topics such as the localization of aid, the ups and downs of community acceptance, and the role of security in a digital world. Join me as we unpack the evolutions of NGO security risk management. Lisa Reilly, it's great to see you here today.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Well, thank you for joining us. In today's episode, we're going to get into a little bit about you and look at the last 10 years. How does that sound?
Terrifying, but yes, let's go ahead.
All right. Well, we'll try and make it less terrifying as we go along. How about that? Let's start with this one. For those of you who might not be familiar, we'd love to hear a little bit more about who Lisa Reilly is. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about your current role and how you got involved in the sector.
Okay, thank you, Tara. So I'm an engineer by training many years ago. And first job I did was around constructing the Channel Tunnel, which sort of enables you to age me as to how long I've been working around. And then after working in the engineering for a while in the UK, I felt I needed something more and something different. And my company actually gave me a 2-year sabbatical to do VSO, voluntary services overseas. And I went to Namibia as a water engineer. Most of the stuff that I did there was much more to do with community engagement than with actual engineering. And after 2 years, I found I didn't want to come back to the UK, and particularly from a gender perspective, the opportunities as a woman in engineering were still prejudice around. There were jobs that I'd applied for where I was extremely qualified for them, but the only reason I didn't get the job was because I was a woman, and that became apparent to me. So there were actually far more interesting opportunities available within the development sector sphere as it was at that time where I was working in Namibia. So I stayed on in Namibia for another 3 years before I decided I wanted to do something different. And it was at that point that I actually moved more into the humanitarian space. My first job as a humanitarian response worker, again, engineering, was in Sudan, and it was still one country. And I worked in various humanitarian jobs for the next 8 years or so. And I was there sort of 2002, 2003. I was back in Afghanistan around sort of 2009 and 10. So that was very interesting to see how much it's changed. And looking at what's happening now, it's very heartfelt for me as I think back to my colleagues and how they must be faring at the moment. I worked in Aceh in the tsunami response and down in Mindanao in the Philippines. From a security perspective, when I was working in these humanitarian responses, security was generally still the responsibility within the program management line. So as program manager, as country director, I had that responsibility. And while in my last posting, before I came back to the UK, I did have a ex-Pakistani military who was part-time security advisor, who was very helpful and very useful. It was still decisions around security and what we could and couldn't do and how we managed the risks was very much within the management function rather than as a separate security function. So I did that. I say I was overseas for, I think, just over 13 years in total. I came back to the UK basically because I was completely burnt out. I had worked myself to a standstill, which explains some of what I'm now doing as my future and what's going forward. And I needed a change. And I originally, when I came back to the UK, I didn't think I would stay. I really thought that was it. I just needed to. So I was very surprised that I'm actually still sitting in the UK. What made me stay was the job opportunity I found. And I was sitting there, thinking, what is it that I can possibly do after all of these years working overseas? And Red R were advertising for a security trainer. And I thought, well, I've never been trained as a trainer. I've never had a security job. Let me go and apply for this job as security trainer. And I got it. And wow. I loved it. I thought it was an opportunity to be able to share what I had learnt. So rather than just having this huge accumulation of knowledge just disappear into a black hole, the opportunity to be able to use my experiences, my pain, to hopefully help, some of the next generation of aid workers to not have to go through the same level of pain, was something that gave me satisfaction. And to actually unpack security as a function in itself, rather than just part of what I had been doing as a country manager, was really interesting. And the more I understood about it, the more I wanted to understand. And I'd never heard of the security strategies, the acceptance, protection, deterrence. So when they were explained to me, I thought, oh, well, that's what I did. And I remember in Afghanistan, when I was there the first time around, we had our offices in Mazar-e Sharif, but we weren't actually implementing any programs there. So the community around where we lived didn't necessarily know who we were, except for the fact that we had a noisy generator and lots of cars that occasionally blocked the streets. So we talked to the local community, and there was a school that was sort of within the block where our compound was, and they had a well, but all it had was one tap. They didn't have a proper washing station or anything. We thought we would put in latrines and a hand wash station in the school so that they knew who we were. So that's what it is about an acceptance strategy. So it was interesting to discover that there was a lot that I'd been doing from common sense, which actually fitted into what we should do when we look at what's good security risk management practices.
So is that what you're still doing today, working in this security risk management space?
I suppose so, you could say that. So after leaving Red R, I joined EISF, as it was then, the European Interagency Security Forum, as the director. At the time I joined, we had a team of 3 people and an intern, I think it was. So over the last 10 years, we've grown from, 4 people and 40 members to about 145 members and a team of 13 people. We've gone from being European based to global. So it has been an exciting 10 years.
Wow. There's a lot to be proud of in what you've shared, it sounds like, and a lot to unpack further in our conversation. I want to take you back a little bit and ask you, when you first got into the sector, did you have any expectations for what you might accomplish?
My honest answer to that is probably no, but
always a but.
But it's interesting. I've not thought about that before, but I think I felt quite strongly I was coming at the topic of security from very much a humanitarian perspective. I had no formal security training, but I knew the realities of trying to keep staff safe in these high risk and conflict areas. And I had some quite troubling experiences when I was in the field level of some of the security people I met, the early security professionals who joined the NGO sector, ex-military, no respect for the NGO community. Security should be something that is driven by the humanitarian need, the humanitarian program. And that should be the purpose of it, not the need just to, we can keep people safe by locking them in a room and putting sandbags all the way around it. But it doesn't help us implement our humanitarian programs. Mm-hmm. So really try, I suppose that was what I thought I could bring to it, is that pragmatic approach of linking security into the humanitarian sector. And the fact, I suppose, from the other way around, is trying also to raise awareness amongst humanitarians that security is not an add-on. It has to be integrated. I mean, one of the things, as I say, I started as a water engineer, and one of the things that used to happen would somebody would come along, one of the team would come along and go, okay, we found this super spot for a school. It's on the top of a hill. It's a great advantage place. Can you now come and give us a well? And I'd go, no, we can't. You've picked a spot that's nowhere near any water, and you've chosen the top of the hill. So you're too far above the water table for us to actually access the water with a hand dug well anyway. So I see security as a similar thing, is you can't, think of an integral part of the program and think about it after you've done 3/4 of the design and construction. Has to be something that's there right as you start the program.
I think it's interesting what you are saying about the way you've brought new perspectives into security. And I think, it'd be interesting if we take a moment to look even a little bit broader at your time and what changes do you think have been made in the sector over the last 10 years in particular, and maybe a little bit also on where we might need to go and where do we need to continue to pursue forward?
I've definitely seen changes in the sector. How much influence I've had on those, I don't think they're my strides. I think there are other people's. GISF representatives within the organisations are those people who have responsibility for, at global level, for the safety and security of humanitarian staff travelling overseas. Some are directors, some are VPs, some are managers, some are advisors. So it's difficult to sort of say, from a job title, but the people who come to our meetings and who engage are those who have primary responsibility for security risk management. Amongst the 40 people, the 40 organisations when I first started, while about a third of those members were women, which has remained fairly constant, what has changed is the number of people who come in from a traditional security background. So people who have come from the military, who come from the police, that proportion has reduced. I mean, they brought in so many skills and they continue to bring in skills and knowledge, which is so important. But the recognition within organisations that they maybe need to look for something above and beyond that is great. But also, some of the people who've come in with a military background, to me, that makes them humanitarian.
So it sounds like you've seen some good strides there. Are there broader things that you would like to see the sector kind of build on from that foundation of evolving from, kind of the, if we can call it, traditional military and police backgrounds to broadening these profiles of the different security managers? But what do you think are some of the ways that foundation is growing?
So while, the proportion of women has remained quite constant at a third, there still needs to be more women. There needs to be also a much greater racial mix. if we look at our membership, almost entirely white, with a few exceptions. We're seeing a few more regional people moving up to those global positions, but is still predominantly white. And the culture is still male. And so even though we've got women involved, it is still, driven by this historical perspective. But one of the problems is we have made a lot of changes. And if you look at the way the sector works now, the security component works, it is very different. But unfortunately, a lot of humanitarians, who, particularly those in the senior positions, remember what we used to be as the security people, quite risk averse rather than enabling. And so breaking the silo the other way. And I think a lot of the time, while we have made these changes in our approach, it's not about hard security. It's not about sort of gates and convoys. It is about risk management. It is about enabling programs. It's about, working for good access, sustainable access. It's about engaging with all of the staff, trying to take this sort of person-centered approach. The problem is if the rest of the humanitarian sector still see us in that idea of, the white ex-military, they're still excluding us from the conversations. And I think this, to me, is where I think we still need to see the most change, is the breaking down of the silos and recognizing that security risk management has to be cross-cutting. We're seeing quite a lot of the work in the sector at the moment around sort of advocacy and policy and the protection of aid workers. But a lot of the time, this conversation is being held by policy people. And they're not necessarily aware of all the stuff that's going on at the ground level that we've been working on for years to try and do this. Now, one of the problems and one of the reasons for that is people who go into security don't tend to be the people who want to stand up and do advocacy. So we don't have the voice. We're not projecting our needs and our voice out there. So we need the advocacy people, but they need to understand us. So we need to find a way to bridge the various, silos between security and advocacy, between security and program, security and HR. We need to recognize that we're all working towards the same aim.
And just from that, do you feel like there's something in this moment that we're currently in that you would want to, help break that silo down further? Is there something that you think is in this moment that you would want to share or maybe leave as a legacy note of your experience having helped bridge the gaps from previous moments like this in the sector? What are your reflections forward?
I'm a bit worried about the idea of legacy because I don't think this is me. I think that, this is a moment in time that myself and GISF have maybe had some input into, but it's a sector change. It isn't my legacy. Maybe others will disagree. The legacy of Lisa. Yeah. Sorry. So I think two of the projects that we've worked on as GISF and the sector over the last few years, the first one was around the paper we did was security risk management for staff with diverse profiles. And that was so interesting when we started it, the number of people who came to us and went, why are you doing this? This isn't needed. And it took us many years because we started with the gender and security paper and then we moved on to that one. And the sea change in the sector as we pushed through that process and these discussions and what's happened since. And, just part of the broader being there as part of this broader discussion on inclusion, diversity and equity and being able to be an active part of that conversation, not a bystander going, well, what do we do about it? But actually they're going, well, this is what we do about it. And this idea of, a person-centered approach to security risk management. And I remember talking to somebody who went, why are you talking about a person-centered approach? Of course it's a person-centered approach. How can we do security if it's not a person-centered approach? Which is absolutely true. So it's also quite sad that we are having to talk about a person-centered approach to security risk management, because unfortunately, a lot of what was done in the past wasn't. And again, an interesting conversation I had with somebody recently, and they were sort of saying, they had staff members who very caring, who were going, I will never ask somebody to do something that I'm not comfortable doing, which sounds great. But if you're a 50-year-old white man, what you're comfortable doing is going to be very different to what a 30-year-old black woman may be comfortable doing. So it's, these conversations around unconscious bias and recognition, I find really uplifting and an opportunity. And I think there is a big question about how do we go from theory to practice. Organizations are chipping away at this. But I think that to me is a really great change and an opportunity to keep going and to push that. And in many ways, it links with the localization agenda. And also, the research piece we did and the subsequent guide, which really takes the partner's perspective and gives us an evidence base for not only really trying to shift the conversation to risk sharing from risk transfer, but also to be able to go, look, you've got to give resources to national organisations to be able to manage their own security. And that feedback that national organisations are worried about raising security concerns with their international partners because they think they won't get funded. But in a way, why are we surprised? Because as INGOs, we don't raise the fact that we've got security concerns to our institutional donors because we're scared we won't get funding. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe we don't put it in those words, but if you look at the lack of resources for effective security risk management and often, the minimal donor engagement on this, we can see it goes, and I bet it goes between the national and the community-based organisations. I bet there's a similar concern.
Wow, there's a lot there, and I think it's really wonderful to have your thoughts on this, because you have seen the sector over the last few years and the changes that are happening and need to continue to take place. And you brought in some really interesting practical elements about your time at GISF, and I just want to take you back there and maybe go a little deeper as to what has being at GISF meant to you.
It's been an amazing experience. The longest I'd ever held a job before I came to GISF was 3 years. So the fact that I've been here for more than 10, I think is a really good example of what it's meant to me. From a personal perspective, the conversations, the people I've met, the stuff that I've learned is unbelievable. But I hope the reward aspect of what I do is I hope that we've made a difference, that we've facilitated a change, that people know where they can come for resources. And if we look at what's available, the fact that we've now got, 100 more organisations than we had, and we haven't marketed. This is word of mouth. This is people coming to us saying, can we join as well? And the fact that, we started out very much humanitarian with a few development, and we've now got human rights-based organisations. some peace building organizations, and they're coming to us and saying, we want to be part of this. We want to keep our staff safe. That is hugely rewarding for me. And I think the final piece that I'd like to mention is my team and the staff that I've been able to work with over the years. And one of the sad bits of being such a small team is that there isn't a lot of progression. So while I've been here for 10 years, there's been a lot of turnover of staff. But I look at the jobs that they've been able to go on to, and I feel that, you know, even people who've interned for us have all gone on to get really good jobs and have all appreciated their time at GISF. And I think that's the other thing for me, which makes me proud and about to cry, is how much the team does mean to me. I suppose, actually, before I go, otherwise I'll get into trouble, I ought to also mention the members. And it has been, there are some amazing people amongst the members. Again, you know, saying about the people I've met, the conversations I've had, the willingness of our members, some of our members, to really share their resources, their experiences. We talk a lot about, you know, the only time you learn is when you make a mistake. But through our members, we've been able to learn from other people's mistakes because our members are willing to share to a level, because it's a safe environment, is really heartening and provides that opportunity for cross-learning between organisations. So I think our members is also something that's really kept me engaged and interested in this role.
Wow, it has been an amazing period to have you here at GISF, and I can probably speak for many who appreciate the contributions you have made and continue to make and will continue to make in different ways. So let's go there a little bit. What is ahead for you? What are the opportunities coming your way?
Some time off, perhaps, might be the first luxury item. Hopefully exciting new opportunities. I mentioned briefly the state I was in when I finished my last mission in Pakistan, and I basically had PTSD, but it was from a build-up of stress and some sort of serious incidents, but not one sort of serious incident. So sort of complex trauma is how it's sort of described now with everything else that's going on in my head. So I started my therapy journey, which I have been on ever since. And about 6 years ago, I actually started training to become a psychotherapist, just because I found it absolutely fascinating. And I hope that, you know, what I've learned as my training has gone on in psychotherapy, I'm also applying to the day job and GISF and security, and certainly along with many other people within the sector, the idea of mental as well as physical safety is something that is fundamental to good security risk management. So I've brought in, you know, a lot of that learnings from my psychotherapy training. And I know a lot of people who I talk to who are still sort of working at country level or even at headquarters level. They try and talk to a counsellor, and unfortunately the counsellor doesn't actually understand the context. So it can be quite difficult to find the right person who has that experience. So I'm hoping that my experience will enable me to be a good therapist for people in the humanitarian sector and others as well. So that's part of what I'll be doing, is continuing to expand my psychotherapy practice. And I think just building on that, so not only the psychotherapy practice, an area that I am really interested and hope that I can continue to do more work on, is this whole idea of mental well-being and safety and linking that up with the good security practice. So I do want to stay in the sector, not only as a therapist, but also looking at, where can we go to make the sector as a whole healthier and safer for those who give their time and energy to meeting humanitarian needs.
Well, I think many will be happy to know that Lisa Reilly isn't going away too far, but will be making new contributions in exciting ways that I think will add a lot of value to what we're all trying to achieve together. So that's really, really nice to hear, Lisa. Just, thinking about all of today's conversations and the many that you've had on this journey, and I just want to give you a moment to share any reflections you might have as GISF's outgoing executive director, as a woman in the sector, as Lisa Reilly, as however you feel you want to leave some words of wisdom with us today.
Words of wisdom. Gosh, if only I had some. So many reflections. I think security risk management is fascinating. It's challenging. It's complex. But if it's done well, it makes a huge difference. And I think that, to me, is what's kept me engaged, is knowing that, if we do what we need to do well, it has a huge impact. And if you can do that and at the same time meet amazing people and continue to learn, if we stop learning, it's a very sad state. I think if certainly never going to say I know everything, always learning from different people. And one of the things that I do is I sort of guest lecture at a couple of universities, and the questions they ask, the students ask, the next generation of humanitarians, gives me great hope for the future.
Well, that's really wonderful, Lisa, and glad that you're also helping to bring in the next generation through your work as well. So, is there a memory or
it's
a moment or a highlight that made you most proud about the work you're doing?
It's difficult to pinpoint one memory. I can think some of the forums that we've attended and the feedback from members. I'd say those are the things that have made me proud, is when members or other people we work with have come to me and said, oh, we've just done this, and we wouldn't have been able to do it without the GISF documentation. We've been able to get through this crisis because of what we got through being part of GISF. And then on a personal level, there are a few students who I've taught who are now members of GISF, and people who were sort of national staff who I met during my travels, who have moved up through their organisations, and again now in more senior positions, who've said that what I shared with them and how I worked with them have helped them on that journey. So I'd say they're the memories that make me proud. I suppose the other thing that I should be proud of, and I should remember to mention, is that in 2020 I won the Women in Security Award from the Professional Security magazine in the UK for contribution to the industry, which I think was quite a good recognition. Again, as all of these stories go with me, it happened during COVID. So we weren't able to go to the formal sort of presentation. Dinner was cancelled, so I was sent a care package, which included quite a lot of wine, some very nice snacks, and some giant party popper type things to celebrate. So when I won, and I had a couple of colleagues round for the evening under COVID rules, and we celebrated, and one of my colleagues let off one of these giant party poppers that was full of centimetre gold discs. I'm still cleaning them up now. Every so often I still find them around my house, and it reminds me of that amazing evening, not so much because of the award that I won, but the colleagues and the friends that I had around me.
Oh, wow. Well, we hope that you find many discs for perpetuity to come. We hope you keep finding them, because that is a really, really nice memory you shared with us. It's been an absolute honor, and what a privilege to be able to learn from you personally, if I can say that, and have this opportunity to speak with you about your journey. And it's just really exciting to know that you won't be too far, but we're all still very grateful for the many contributions you've made along the way. So thanks for being with us today. And thanks for helping us to understand a little of your insights over the last 10 years.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tara. Thank you to the GISF Secretariat and to, Secretariat past and present, and to all our members and all of the other amazing people I've got to meet over the last 10 years.
The Global Interagency Security Forum is a member-led NGO with a global network of over 140 member organizations and affiliates. We are committed to achieving sustainable access for populations in need through improved safety and security for aid workers and operations. GISF's original research, collaboration, and events drive positive change in security risk management across the humanitarian and development sector. We operate according to humanitarian principles and lead on best practices and innovation by pushing for a collaborative and inclusive approach.
The people doing the world's most important work are up against the biggest challenges. Since the 90s, security incidents involving NGOs have increased as their independence and impartiality no longer protect them. Humanitarians are actively targeted, as well as exposed to the risks of conflict and disaster, facing kidnapping, injury, and death in order to help those in need. And the threats to their safety means their ability to help diminishes too. NGOs began to create roles for dedicated security professionals, but they often lacked support and resources and worked in isolation. In 2006, a group of them from the UK and Ireland got together to develop coherent approaches to security risk management in the humanitarian space, eventually becoming an established network, the European Interagency Security Forum. With a strategic, inclusive, and collaborative focus, the Forum has created a center of excellence, facilitates a peer-to-peer network, builds capacity for security risk management, and provides a voice for practitioners, reaching over 100 members. In response to growing demand, it has now gone global, bringing different perspectives, expertise, and resources to make core activities such as original research, trainings, workshops, and knowledge sharing more impactful than ever. As a result, organizations are able to build their security risk management on an even stronger foundation to keep more aid workers safe and enable sustainable access to communities in need. With a vision to see the work of the whole third sector done more effectively by supporting NGOs around the world, we are the Global Interagency Security Forum.